So today we are going to be talking about the Toyota Denso Iridium long life spark plugs. This one here. The part number is SC16HR11. So these are the spark plugs that originally come from the factory. And so I'm just going to be talking about these because I'm going to be installing new spark plugs very soon in the next a couple or a few days on a 2017 Corolla. So I'm going to be talking about that. Welcome back to the Moose Mobile Auto Repair channel. And so I just wanted to talk about these Denso Iridium spark plugs. The one that I have here are brand new, straight from the dealership. So these spark plugs that I got are roughly $17 to $18 Canadian a piece for each one. I paid roughly maybe 68 or 69, including taxes. And so these spark plugs are they come from the factory. So this particular one, the part number SC16HR11, has been superseded by SC20HR11, which you will see from the factory. So on the 1.8 liter 2ZR FE engines, these spark plugs, they come from the factory. So you may see the older part number inside the engine that came from the factory, SC20HR11. So the one that I have here is a superseded part number. So they no longer make the other part number, as it's been discontinued. So they're using the new part number now for these spark plugs. So very shortly I'll be going through the details about these Denso Iridium long life spark plugs. Now these Denso Iridium long life spark plugs, they originally come with the engine from the factory. So these are the ones that you are supposed to use. Now they do have another version of the Denso Iridium spark plugs. They call it the Denso TT. So the TT is the twin tip version. So it's a more of a performance spark plug, which gives a better ignitability. So the combustion is much better than the standard long life spark plugs. So the Denso TT spark plugs is just more of a performance plug. Gives a little bit more performance and better fuel mileage and stuff like that. So the interchangeable part numbers for the Denso spark plug is 3499. So SC16HR11. The interchangeable part number is 3499, and they also have a Toyota part number as well. Nine zero nine 1901275 for the Iridium long life spark plugs. They also have it here as well, SC16HR11. According to the Denso website, they say that the Iridium Power, the Denso TT spark plug, is a high performance spark plug. The Iridium Long Life is the genuine part that comes OE from car manufacturers. It's not just Toyota vehicles, but there are other vehicles that are equipped with these Denso spark plugs. I will list some of the vehicles in which this spark plug is compatible for on the Toyota vehicles, but it's mainly for the 1.8 liter engines. So I will put the screenshot somewhere on the screen to list some of the compatible vehicles that this spark plug goes into. Now, the Iridium long life spark plugs are good for roughly 120,000 miles or 192,000 kilometers. Now, I would highly recommend to change the spark plugs a lot sooner than that. So usually I like to recommend spark plugs roughly close to 60 or 62,000 miles, or roughly 96,000 to 100,000 kilometers, for a variety of reasons. And the number one reason is for peak fuel efficiency and performance. And so usually some people will start to notice a loss of uh, of performance, such as acceleration and power and fuel consumption, after like 50 or 60,000 kilometers, roughly 30 to 40,000 miles. And so uh, even though that the spark plug can still go beyond this mileage, I would still advise to have the spark plugs changed at regular intervals. I personally would not wait that long, 120,000 miles or 192,000 kilometers, because it's very possible that the spark plugs can get seized inside the cylinder head, and you'll have a hard time in trying to get them out. And if not, you'll run into some major problems. So I recommend to change the spark plugs a little bit earlier than what the manufacturer uh, uh, suggests to replace them at. I like to recommend to replace things a little bit earlier than what the manufacturer states, because sometimes the manufacturer, they just they state something, but it's not really, sometimes it's not really practical in the real world. Yeah, sure, a spark plug can go over 200,000, 300,000 kilometers without changing it, but it's not good, because if you don't change spark plugs on time, it could put more stress onto the ignition coil. And so that will cost a lot more money in the long run. And in some rare cases, possible engine damage, such as pre-ignition or, or detonation. So you don't want that to happen. You want to make sure that you have a good set of spark plugs in the engine, and that you want to replace them at regular intervals. Now, spark plugs don't really need to be changed all that often. It really depends on the application and the engine, and such as if you have like a turbocharged or performance engine, uh, the situation is going to vary. But for a regular naturally aspirated engine, you don't need to change the spark plugs all that often, but you do and should be changing the spark plugs a little bit sooner than what the manufacturer states. Now, the main difference regarding the Denso Iridium long life plugs and the Denso TT is the tip, the electrode tip. It's hard to show on camera, but the tip on the ground, the top ground electrode, and the center electrode. So the tip is a little bit different coating and material, and so that's going to to make a big difference with the performance and fuel consumption. Now the Denso long life Iridium plugs, they come well, all of the spark plugs, they come pre-gapped from the factory or from the manufacturers. So the Iridium long life, the preset gap is at 44 thousandths of an inch, and the Denso TT is at 40 thousandths of an inch. So it's 4 thousandths of an inch difference for the spark plug. And I know that some people, they like to use like a spark plug a checker ramp style gauge, something like this. And so they like to check the spark plugs to see the gap and stuff. But sometimes you really need to be careful with these spark plugs, because they often have a special coating in between the electrode tip. And so if you're not careful enough, and even when you are checking the spark plugs with the ramp style gauge, it's possible that you can damage the coating, and then the spark plug is garbage after that. Now, a lot of cases, you are not supposed to gap spark plugs. Now today, you are not supposed to gap the spark plugs as they come pre-gapped uh, from the factory or from the manufacturer. So you're not supposed to gap the spark plugs. But I know that some people have stated that the gap was off or something like that. They stated that they need to adjust the gap. So I don't recommend adjusting the gaps on these type of spark plugs these days, because typically you're not supposed to. And if you attempt, or if you try to, you could damage the spark plug. And so if the gap is off, or if there's a problem with it, just go and get a new one. You're not supposed to be playing around with the spark plug gaps on these modern design spark plugs. So any platinum, iridium, and now they have the ruthenium spark plugs, which NGK makes. And so you shouldn't have to adjust the gaps under any circumstances. So say if you drop the spark plug on the floor by accident, the spark plug is garbage. You need to go and get yourself a new one, or a new set. So you need to be very careful. These spark plugs are extremely fragile. So the Corolla I'm going to be working on is the LE, the regular 1.8 liter engine. It's not the eco version. It's just the regular Corolla. So hopefully in the next 2 to 3 days or something, I'll be making a video on that, hopefully. And so now I'm just going to be discussing a little bit further about these spark plugs that I have here. So I just wanted to talk about the spark plug gap here. So I'm just going to carefully to check the gap. You need to be very careful. So this is roughly, it's close to 40 thousandths of an inch. Usually I don't like to use these, because the issue is that when you go through here, it can get caught in between the center electrode and the ground electrode tip. And so if you're not careful, you could damage that tip at the end here. And so you have to watch out. So that's it's still common practice and a good idea to check the spark plug gaps, but usually if you try to check the gap, you could damage the spark plug. So I kind of, these days, I try to shy away from checking the gap, but it's something that I would like to do, but these days I think it's best that I stay away from checking the gap, because if you try to check the gap, it's possible that, like how I said earlier, it's very possible to damage the coating if you're not careful. And even if you're careful enough, it's you can still damage the coating and damage the center electrode tip. So you need to watch out for that. One other thing is I've been noticing there's been a lot of counterfeit spark plugs these days. And so one thing that you can check if you're not sure that if you have a counterfeit spark plug is to check the resistance from the ground terminal, from this end to the ground terminal of this end, and to check the resistance and compare the readings. Usually like there is a resistor inside the spark plug that runs through here, so you can check with a multimeter to check the resistance, ohms. And usually a genuine plug will have a lot less resistance than a counterfeit plug. I'll show you in just a second. So that's one way to check to see if you have a counterfeit plug. But usually you're best off to just go to the dealership or order from your local parts store. And that way you can avoid counterfeit parts altogether in a majority of cases. So you can't go wrong by buying from the dealer or from the local parts stores. I sometimes, in most cases, I would stay away from ordering from places such as Amazon and eBay and so forth, because those are the areas in which you're most likely to obtain counterfeit parts if you're not careful enough. So I have my multimeter, so you can check the resistance from from one end of the terminal to the other end. 6 point is changing a lot. 5.93 uh, mega ohms. One mega ohms. The numbers are changing a lot. So there's a difference if you check it from the very bottom or from the side here. So I'm checking it from the very bottom of the terminal to the end. 420 something kilo ohms. It's changing a lot. So you can do something like this to verify if you have a counterfeit spark plug or not, or if you have the genuine one. So there is a difference if you put the leads on the outside of the terminal here or on the end. So you can make yourself a reference point as to how to check these. So this is just one thing that you can check. Now, usually the counterfeit plugs are gonna be substantially higher resistance than compared to the genuine part. Now, I don't have a counterfeit spark plug on me at the moment, so I can't do a side to side comparison. So, the one other issue I want to talk about has been debated for the for many years since the start of the internal combustion engine, is the use of anti-seize on the threads. Now, some people have stated that to not use anti-seize. Other people, they swear by anti-seize to their entire life of using these. So, someone like me, I always try to use a sparing amount of anti-seize, the silver stuff. So I like to apply a tiny bit on the top portion of the threads here, because when you insert the spark plug inside the cylinder head, and when you turn the spark plug, the anti-seize, it, it will work its way through all the way down to the thread. So I apply some here very carefully, and then I install them. You don't want to get anti-seize on the insulator part or the ceramic over here. So you don't want to get any anti-seize there. Just a little dab here. You don't need to dip the entire spark plug in anti-seize. You're just putting a light coating, a tiny amount, and that's it. And you should be fine. And now the issue with spark plugs these days is that the problem is that they say that the spark plugs have a special coating, and nickel or zinc or on whatever coating is on the spark plug. And so they say that you don't need to apply anti-seize, but if you don't live in the rust belt, it may be fine. You may be okay, but if you live in the rust belt, it may be more problematic. So I've seen quite a few vehicles in my time where the spark plugs were seized or they broke off, and so it was more of a challenge to get them out than when they're not seized in there. So there is a rule in which you're supposed to reduce the amount of torque between 20 and 30%. So say that the torque spec is 15 foot-pounds to install the spark plugs, then you would reduce that by 20 to 30%. You would have to put it on the calculator if you cannot manually calculate it, and so it will be a little less torque. But I don't do that. I still torque it to the manufacturer's specifications. If it says 15, I torque it to 15. If it's 18, I torque it to 18. I think on some of the Toyotas, I think most of them are like between 15 and 18 foot-pounds. I have to check the specifications, and I can put it on the screen for the vehicle that I'm going to be working on. And so the issue here is that you're only putting a very light coating of anti-seize, so you don't really have to reduce the torque spec. And I've been doing this for close to 16 years now, and I always apply anti-seize on spark plugs, and I torque it to the manufacturer's specifications. If I'm able to fit a torque wrench on the engine, I will use a torque wrench. Now, some people, they may laugh, and you can go ahead and laugh, but the issue is that it's very imperative to use a torque wrench, because the issue is that on most spark plugs, they have a sealing washer here. They have a gasket, or this is like a crush washer. So this crush washer has to seal 100% properly, so that the combustion gases does not leak past the spark plug. Otherwise that's going to cause issues and problems. So this is to seal against the combustion chamber, so that the blow by gases do not pass through here and cause a leak, and that will cause many issues. No, I know that in some cases you may not be able to fit a torque wrench to tighten spark plugs, but I know in a majority of cases uh, you can. Now, if you don't have a torque wrench, in most cases you can tighten them snug. Some people, they follow like a rule, like a quarter turn after the spark plug contacts the head or the threads, and then they do like a quarter turn or something. Now, a majority of cases, by tightening them by feel or by hand, you will be able to get away with it. But there are some cases where you may think it's tight, it's not tight enough. Either you may over tighten or under tighten it. So usually I like to tighten them down until the cylinder head, until the spark plug has contacted the cylinder head or the threads, and then I tighten it a tiny bit, and then I double check my work by using a torque wrench, just to make sure that it's torqued to the proper spec, and to verify that I tighten it up properly. So I always like to use a torque wrench to be on the safe side, because the last thing I want is to have a comeback. So you don't want that to happen. So if you can use a torque wrench, use a torque wrench. If not, it's not the end of the world, but just you can tighten it up snug. But I recommend to use a torque wrench for every spark plug application. Now this is a type of anti-seize that I use, the silver grade Permatex. So you don't need to put like too much. The anti-seize, I know some guys don't like using this stuff because it makes a gigantic mess. So I just like to apply a thin coating on the top. You don't need to put too much, and I just like to use my pinky finger to spread the anti-seize, turn the spark plug. Now, where the spark plug will get seized, it will get seized on the top if the spark plug seizes up. So that's where you want to apply the anti-seize. So I just like to spread it evenly like this, and then that's it. You don't need to put too much. So then when you insert the anti-seize will spread all the way down to all of the threads. So I just apply like a thin coat onto the threads, and you should be good. So once again, I know that sometimes it's a matter of personal preference, but I like to use anti-seize. I've never had a problem. So the last thing you want is to have a spark plug seize in the cylinder head, and you don't want anything breaking in there. In some worst case scenarios, you may need to rethread the cylinder head or remove the cylinder head completely, and try to fix it then. So it's those situations in which you want to avoid. Now, there are some neglected cars out there that haven't had a spark plug change. So in some cases, you may run into those issues. So I'm not going to be talking about it in detail, but I know that you can apply some WD-40 or penetrating oil inside the spark plug hole to make removal a little bit easier if the spark plug gets seized up, or if they're hard to turn. So penetrating oil and or something like WD-40 or Crown spray will probably work and help to remove the spark plug if it's not broken off yet. And if the hex is still there, then you can put the a socket on it still. I have this gadget here, the spark plug tester machine. I'm just doing this for experimental and entertainment purposes. So I wanted to check these spark plugs out, and it's also good for checking counterfeit parts, counterfeit spark plugs to test them out. So we're going to close this. I'm going to turn this on. You see the sparks. I'll give you guys a close-up. It's on the maximum at the moment. On 6,000. I don't know on what that is. It said HV, the voltage. Try it again. So one last thing I forgot to mention is that as the spark plug wears out, the gap will increase slightly, and that's just the natural occurrence because of all of the heat and the expansion. So the gap will increase slightly. Now the issue is that if you keep a spark plug in for too long, it is going to cause a misfire, because that if the gap is too wide, the the spark will not be able to jump across that gap. So if it's too small or if it's too large of a gap, the spark plug will not be able to create a proper spark. And so the computer in the vehicle will tell the ignition coil to increase the voltage, and it will try to increase the voltage, and it will try to keep on to create and maintain a spark between that gap. And if you keep spark plugs in for too long, for too many kilometers or miles, it's going to put more stress on the ignition systems, such as the ignition coils. So it's going to wear out the ignition coils faster. So about the manufacturer's suggested intervals, I recommend to change the spark plugs a lot sooner, because I've seen vehicles in which the electrode and insulator completely melted off, and somehow did not really have a misfire exactly at that time, but it was slightly before the interval. I believe it was on I still remember and recall, I think it was on an older Honda Civic. It was a 2008 model, the 1.8 liter engine. And those ones use the platinum spark plugs. And the interval calls for 160,000 kilometers, which is roughly 100,000 miles. And so the vehicle was approaching close to 160. I think it was like, let's say 153,000 kilometers on it. And so I recommended to change the spark plugs. One out of the 4 spark plugs, I saw the electrode and the insulator completely melted off, and somehow for some strange reason it didn't have a solid misfire at that time. But you will have a tremendous reduction in performance and fuel mileage. So one thing I wanted to mention is that these spark plugs utilize the 9/16. They're 14 millimeters in size, so you will be needing a special spark plug socket. The one I have here is an AST spark plug socket. The company name is Asenmacher. So it's a 12-point socket, and it fits perfectly onto this. So this is also used for like the European vehicles, like on the BMWs and the Mini Coopers. So this one, it fits snug and tightly onto the spark plug. And I also have another one by OEM Tools, also a 9/16. So it just reaches up to the hex here. It doesn't go all the way in like how the other one does. So either one works fine. I did have some issues with this particular socket. There are sometimes it can get stuck inside. So sometimes if I'm having a hard time using this socket to either to get the spark plug in or out, because sometimes the sockets, they get trapped in there. So I just end up using this one instead. So I just end up using this one. This one goes all the way in, as you can see. These spark plugs socket size, or the hex size, is not your typical conventional 5/8 or 16 millimeter size. This one is the smaller version, so you'll need a special socket like this one. One other thing that I wanted to mention about spark plugs: if you have the original spark plugs still installed in the engine and from the factory, when you pull the spark plugs out, you may see something at the bottom here. You will see either a dot or a plus sign, which will signify that these are the factory spark plugs. On this one, there isn't anything here, but on the factory plugs, you will see either a plus or a dot on the bottom of the terminal here. So that's going to tell you that those are the original spark plugs that came with the engine. Now I do have old used spark plugs somewhere in which it had the plus symbol on it, but I'm not able to find it at the moment. I remember doing spark plugs on a 2015 Sienna some years ago, and I'm trying to see if I still have them lying around somewhere. Usually on that one, it has a plus symbol, so those ones are the original spark plugs. That particular Sienna van, it went for it had 250,000 kilometers on it, and it was still working, except that it had an extended crank on cold startup when you try to start the vehicle, because the spark plugs were worn out. But Other than that, those spark plugs were still working, but of course there would be a reduced performance and fuel consumption, more fuel consumption on those old spark plugs. So yes, I have seen spark plugs go for a very long time, but it's not advised to keep them in there for all that long. It's still recommended to replace them just before the service interval, if you can, and it's a much better decision that way. That's it for today. If you enjoyed this video and found it helpful, please don't forget to give it a like, and please consider subscribing to my channel if you're not already a subscriber, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Have a good day and take care.